Hello and welcome to our Bible study, the series that we're on now, What We Need to Know About World Religions. We're now looking at what we need to know about Buddhism, part 2. Last week we did an initial exploration of the Buddhism, the Buddha himself, some of his life story, his teachings, the development of Buddhism by his immediate followers. Today we're going to take that and trace it a little farther out, the development of Buddhism moving forward, and some of those aspects of Buddhism as it moves into different cultures. The Mahayana tradition, meaning the great community, was a later development in Buddhism. It emerged around the same time as Christ. You may well remember that the Buddha lived some 550 years before Jesus, and so 500 years or so into the history of Buddhism, this idea of the great community in Mahayana developed. It was dominant in northern and eastern Asia, and even dominant there today. There are claims that this tradition originated with the Buddha himself, the idea of contemplative wisdom coupled with compassion. The Bodhisattva ideal, one of those great words, Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva ideal is part of this Mahayana tradition in which a potential Buddha does not go straight to nirvana. Now, we always think of the Buddha as a name, but it's a title. It means the enlightened one or the awakened one. And all people can strive for awakening, enlightening. It's a long and very challenging path. But this Bodhisattva ideal is that someone who is close to enlightenment, maybe on their last lifetime in that cycle of reincarnation, chooses not to go straight to nirvana, the extinguishing of the light and the candle flame, but actually returns to the world to help others along the path. This person moves to nirvana through enlightenment. The prayer, may I achieve Buddhahood, awakening for the sake of other human beings. And celestial Buddhas and Bodhisattvas were said to have superhuman powers since they resided in the heavens and function in many ways like Hindu gods. An example of this was Avalokiteshvara, the greatest Bodhisattva of compassion, who could take any form appropriate to save the person who calls on him. Tara, in Indian and Tibetan traditions, was the female manifestation of compassion. In this line, the doctrine of emptiness represents an extension of Buddha's doctrine of no self. It denies the reality of permanent self and denies the reality of even the momentary phenomenon that make up the flow of personality. Everything is empty of identity, according to the doctrine of emptiness. There was a reorientation of the conceptual framework of Buddhism. Non-duality means that there is no real difference between any two things, that nirvana is right here and now if we can perceive it, that we are already Buddhas since our nature is no different than theirs. Buddha Tantra, around the 6th century AD, or in the Common Era, believed that poisonous emotions, passions, wrath, etc., can be removed by cultivating and transmuting the emotions themselves. That there's non-duality between samsara and nirvana. Samsara is the wheel of the drudgery of this daily physical life, and nirvana is the extinguishing of the light. And so this non-duality doctrine said there's no real difference between the two, that the Buddha can represent a union of male and female in the tantric ritual, the sacred circle, the mandale of Buddhas. And again, this idea is a little hard for us to grasp of non-duality, but the idea is very clear that we are all one and there is no real difference between us. Buddhism expanded into Southeast Asia in the form of Theravada Buddhism. That was such an important part, and we'll talk some more about that. Buddhism also made its way into Tibet. The first diffusion of the Dharma in Tibet, the teaching in Tibet, was in the 7th century, so quite a long time. And it prompted debate on the future of Tibetan Buddhism. This debate involved the practice of sudden awakening, sudden enlightenment, such as was practiced in China, versus gradual enlightenment or gradual awakening, such as in India. The second diffusion of Tibetan Buddhism in the 11th century gave rise to the line of incarnations from the Dalai Lama from the 14th century to the present. Chinese Buddhism was a really significant branch and very different branch of Buddhism. Buddhism in China dates from the 2nd century. If you compare that, in Tibet, it was not until the 7th century. Buddhism in China was influenced by Confucius, who lived around the same time as the Buddha, 500 or so BC, or before the Common Era. Han Confucianism during the Han Dynasty, about 206 to 220, 206 BC to 220 of the Common Era. So what was going on around that time? A couple of hundred years before Jesus, the time leading up to the Maccabean Rebellion in Israel, through the Roman conquest, and all the way up to the first couple of centuries of the Christian era in Palestine, provided great stability, this Han Confucianism, its vision of heaven and earth and family and society as a single whole. Its key values were harmony, respect for elders, and the proper performance of ritual. The Han synthesis was falling apart by the 2nd century or so in the Common Era, and so it was open to changes. There's a long process of Buddhism becoming part of Chinese society, which involved the adaptation of Buddhism to China. For example, Chinese emphasis on the family was always very strong, whereas Buddhism originally taught that you left the family. And of course, the languages of Chinese on the one hand and Pali Sanskrit were also very different. In China, the connections with Taoism and Buddhism were significant. The Tao is like an empty bowl. Taoism helped cushion China in the fall of the Han Dynasty, and it changed Buddhism into a more pragmatic and down-to-earth philosophy. Once again, Buddhism demonstrates its flexibility and malleability as it adapts to different cultures. Buddhism becomes more open to the idea of sudden enlightenment. You remember, in India, it was a gradual enlightenment, but as we get into China, more of the sudden enlightenment. It is said that the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the origin of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of all things. The Tao is like an empty bowl. It may be used, but its capacity is never exhausted. Taoism enabled Buddhism to be expressed in a Chinese way. Buddhist values influenced Chinese literature and the arts. Mahayana teaching and devotional traditions became very popular in China, and the Chan approach distrusted too many words or complex thoughts. Chan liked the use of paradox and the direct influence of person to person, the importance of teachers working directly with students. Modern Buddhism in Vietnam was influenced by China or Chinese Chan tradition, and we know it best through the monk Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Buddhist monk. And the Vietnamese Buddhism also revered powerful Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Buddhism moved many places, including Japan, and went to Japan from Korea in the 6th century. Japanese Buddhism was borrowed in large measure from the Chinese and their blending of Taoism with Buddhism. It also had to work in Japan with Shintoism, Shinto, the sun goddess Amaterasu. In some ways, this sun goddess was seen as a rival with Buddha. Prince Shotoku in the 573 to 621, so the early 7th century of the Common Era, helped to reorganize Japanese culture and politics, and he was a devout Buddhist. He used Buddhism to unite the nation. In his constitution, it stated the value of a harmonious nation. It said in part, harmony is to be valued, and the avoidance of wanton opposition is to be honored. All men are influenced by partisanship. There are few who are intelligent, but when those above are harmonious and those below are friend, there is concord in the discussion of business. Right views of things spontaneously gain acceptance. Then what is there which cannot be accomplished? Emperor Shomu in the 8th century led building projects that emphasized Buddhism. Todaji, the great Eastern temple, is still the largest wooden building in the world, and it houses a bronze statue of the Japanese Buddha, Vairochana. 2 important Buddhist schools developed, Kukai and Kobodashi. Kukai was a Japanese version of the Mahayana school and believed in the power of words. Kobodashi emphasized the importance of the Lotus Sutra, one vehicle, one way. Of the other important Japanese schools of Buddhism, the most famous was Zen, which developed in the 12th century and was a discipline for sudden awakening. Koan is a puzzle to stop the mind in its tracks, preventing too much thinking. For example, the famous phrase, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" Sitting meditation can be an end in itself, not just as a vehicle for awakening. All moments are equally reflective of emptiness. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. Enlightenment is like the moon reflected on the water. The moon does not get wet, nor is the water broken. Although its light is wide and great, the moon is reflected even in a puddle an inch wide. Zen has become a popular form of Buddhism in the United States. So going back just a little bit, Tao Te Ching, by the time Lao Tzu wrote his manuscript some 2,500 years ago, again around the time of Confucius, the Tao had been part of Chinese culture for thousands of years. One reason Taoism has such durability is that paradoxically, because of its flexible and inclusive nature, the original concept of Tao meant the way. It was simply the observation that reality had a certain way about it. This way encompasses all of existence, life, the universe, everything. Because of the Tao's inclusive nature, when Buddhism entered China some 1,800 years ago, it found easy acceptance despite its differences from Taoism. A sense of optimism and humor runs through ancient Tao, aptly expressed as kind of a carefree wandering. Buddhism, on the other hand, saw life askuhai, the bitter ocean, focused on suffering. Despite this, Chinese people regarded Buddhist teachings as simply another way to express the Tao. Amazing. The ultimate purpose of the Tao Te Ching is to provide us with wisdom and insights that we can apply to life. If we cannot do that, then it doesn't matter how well we understand the passages. The true Tao must be lived. And that is very much like our contemporary systems theory thinking, in which it's not so much understanding, but it's the doing, the behavior that matters. Tibetan Buddhist Surai Das writes, "The sublime peace of the Tao is something we can all experience by coming into accord with how things actually are, what Tibetan Buddhists call the natural state. Rather than trying to build skyscrapers or to reach heaven and bridges to cross the raging river of samsara to reach the so-called other shore of nirvana, we could realize that all flows right through us now, and that there's nowhere to go, nothing to get, that all is perfect as it is. The deep inner knowing has a lot to do with trust and letting things be. There is nirvanic peace in things just as they are." Paul Knitter wrote a book called "Without Buddha, I Could Not Be a Christian." In it, he explains that Buddhism teaches practices that will help Christians draw on the mystical contents of our faith. Buddhism can help Christians to be mystical Christians, to realize and enter into the non-dualistic or unitive heart of Christian experience, a way to be one with the Father, to live Christ's life, to be not just a container of the Spirit, but an embodiment and expression of the Spirit, to live by and with and in the Spirit, to live and move and have our being in God. Sounds pretty familiar to me. What a wonderful Trinitarian description of living as an image and likeness of God. Like Christian contemplative practices, Buddhist practices such as meditation, silence, and living mindfully help us encounter the deepest, truest reality, our oneness with God. And now I'd like to close this study with a practice regarding the 4 limitless qualities. This was taken from Father Richard Rohr, a contemporary Catholic scholar and priest who writes so much in terms of mystical spirituality. He says Buddhism identifies 4 limitless qualities: loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Loving kindness and compassion may appear to be the same, but there are subtle differences. In Buddhism, compassion includes a willingness to identify so fully with someone that you would be willing to carry a little of their suffering. Equanimity may be close to what Christians mean by peace. These 4 qualities are limitless in that they increase with practice and use. If you don't choose daily and deliberately to practice loving kindness, it's unlikely that a year from now you'll be any more loving. The qualities are also limitless because they're already within you, which beautifully parallels the Christian theology of the Holy Spirit. There's a place in you that is already kind, compassionate, joyful, and equanimous. Paraphrasing Tibetan Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron, here's a practice for growing loving kindness. I invite you to set aside a quiet period to go through these simple steps with intention and openness. Recognize the place of loving kindness inside yourself. It is there. Honor it. Awaken it. Actively draw upon it. Drawing upon the source of loving kindness within, bring to mind someone for whom you feel sincere goodwill and tenderness, someone you love very much. From your source, send loving kindness toward this person and bless them. Awaken loving kindness for someone who is a casual friend or associate, someone not in your inner circle, but a bit further removed, someone you admire or appreciate. Send love to that individual. Now send loving kindness to someone about whom you feel neutral or indifferent. For example, a clerk at the store. Send your blessing to this person. Now think of someone who has hurt you, who has talked evil of you, whom you find it difficult to like or you don't enjoy being around. Bless them. Send this would-be enemy your love. Bring all of the first 5 individuals into the stream of flowing love, including yourself. Hold them here for a few minutes. Finally, extend this love to embrace all beings in the universe. It is one piece of love, one love toward all, regardless of religion, race, culture, or likability. This practice can help you know in your mind and heart and body that love is not determined by the worthiness of the object. Love is determined by the giver of the love. These steps can be repeated for other 3 limitless qualities. Remember, spiritual gifts increase with use. Love, compassion, joy, and equanimity will grow as you let them flow. You are simply an instrument, a conduit for the inflow and the outflow of the gifts of the Spirit. Bless you now, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.